In the annals of the 21st century, the Russia-Ukraine conflict stands as a cataclysmic event, leaving a grim tally in its wake. Over 62,300 lives lost, 61,000 souls scarred by injuries, and a haunting figure of 15,000 individuals vanished into the abyss of uncertainty. Since the fateful invasion that ignited in February 2022, this war has wrought untold destruction, depleting precious resources and thrusting the global community into a fractious divide where nations are compelled to make a perilous choice. Yet, it is imperative to recognize that this conflict transcends the borders of Russia and Ukraine, ensnaring major global players like the United States and China in its intricate web of consequences. Each of these superpowers, in their own way, holds a stake in the outcome of this tumultuous struggle, shaping the future of nations and the world at large. Right now, we still can't find a definitive end to this conflict. Ukraine has been fighting back to recover its lost territories, evidenced by the drone attacks it has launched as part of its counteroffensive. The country's pushback, albeit slow, has been remarkable, considering the obvious disadvantage it has in terms of military size and firepower. Interestingly, even though Ukraine isn't an official part of NATO, it still has been receiving aid from the Allied bloc. In fact, Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has just visited Washington with the aim of securing more U.S. weapons to strengthen its defense against the missile onslaught that Russia has been raining down in recent weeks. But the most painful aspect of this war is that its effects are more than just contained in Ukraine. Economically speaking, the Russia-Ukraine war has been stifling the economic recovery of the world, given that we just barely survived a seemingly world-ending pandemic. Regardless of where you stand on this conflict, one must acknowledge that it caused an unmitigated catastrophe, not just to global peace, but to our already fragile economy. Slow economic recovery from the pandemic. In war-ravaged Ukraine, the economic turmoil is evident. Physical infrastructure lies in ruins, and millions have sought refuge abroad, while thousands have perished or suffered life-altering injuries. This crisis compounds the global economic woes triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. The World Bank reports a staggering increase of approximately 100 million people thrust into extreme poverty, pushing the worldwide total to nearly 700 million, with a significant portion dwelling in conflict zones. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, experts were expecting the global economy to grow by about 5% in 2022. However, a report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, in November 2022 described the war in Ukraine as a massive and unprecedented shock to the energy markets. This shock, along with other factors, caused global economic growth to slow down significantly, reaching only 3.1% in 2022. The outlook for 2023 isn't much better, with the OECD predicting a further slowdown to just 2.2%. The impact of the war has been particularly harsh on Europe's economy. In fact, the report highlighted that Europe's growth in 2023 is expected to be a mere 0.3%, making it one of the most affected regions. Dark days ahead for Europe. For decades, Russia and Europe had a close relationship when it came to energy. Russia supplied Europe with oil and gas through pipelines, and Europe saw this as a way to stabilize its energy supply and reduce its reliance on the Middle East, which had unpredictable supplies coming by ship. Europe became Russia's biggest customer. Before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, 60% of Russia's oil and 74% of its natural gas went to Europe. Europe thought that buying Russian energy would help Russia develop while also giving Europe some influence. But it actually let Russia expand its power. Many European countries, like Germany, Finland, and others, became heavily dependent on Russia for their gas. Now, Europe is trying to move away from Russian gas. It's not easy because some of the alternatives, like coal, pose environment concerns. Last year, Europe used 20% less natural gas because the prices went up a lot due to supply problems. However, Europe is getting more liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from the United States. The U.S. is becoming the world's biggest LNG exporter in 2023, and many of its exports are going to EU countries. Germany is even building LNG terminals to import more gas. But LNG is more expensive than gas from pipelines. An expert said that gas prices in Europe were like $400 for a barrel of oil. More LNG might bring prices down, but other options are being considered. Nuclear power is one of them. Germany, for example, delayed closing its nuclear plants after the invasion. France and the UK are building more nuclear plants, and Bulgaria, a big electricity exporter, is getting nuclear fuel from other sources. In the long run, Europe plans to use less Russian gas by being more efficient, using renewable energy, and getting gas from other places. Europe doesn't want to rely too much on Russia anymore. Russia might still sell energy, but it might not be as powerful as before. Europe is taking charge, and it seems like the customer is always right, as Putin might have forgotten. Risk of de-globalization. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the risks of de-globalization have become more significant. After all, wars always cause divides between nations, which could potentially mean disruptions in global change. This impact is something that we can never downplay at all. Even during the early days of the pandemic, people talked about making supply chains stronger and relying less on imports for critical things like vaccines, antibiotics, and semiconductors for technology. Now, with some countries moving away from strict COVID-19 policies, we're seeing how supply disruptions can affect the world. Russia is likely to be isolated for a while, but if trade between major economies and China also decreases, it could have a big impact on the global economy and geopolitical stability. Contextually, China and Russia are allies. So if China decides to put a restriction, say, for example, its import and export, things could go downhill. But there's still hope, though. Experts have long argued that countries trading with each other are less likely to go to war, and this idea still holds true today. So, despite China and the United States being on opposing sides in the Russia-Ukraine war, they are still trading partners. In the short term, de-globalization would be a major blow to the world economy. It could increase prices, limit consumer choices, and reduce technological advancements. In a nutshell, it can plunge the world into severe poverty and inequality. The long-term effects are less clear, with some estimates suggesting a modest decrease in GDP for countries like the United States and China. However, these estimates depend on many factors, like how easily countries can find alternatives to imported goods and the impact on local monopolies. Disruption in the supply chain. Before the invasion, businesses in the UK, the US, and China were starting to see some relief from the challenges in their supply chains, although things were still tough in the Eurozone. But now, the situation is likely taking a U-turn. You see, Russia and Ukraine play a big role in making essential metals like nickel, aluminum, and palladium. Any hiccups in getting these metals can throw a wrench into industrial production and disrupt supply chains far and wide. And it's not just metals, we're talking about a shortage of parts that come from that region, especially in industries like making cars. In fact, some German car makers have already had to scale back their production because they couldn't get enough wiring systems from Ukraine. The food we eat could also feel the impact. Russia and Ukraine are major players in the global fertilizer production game, which is a big deal for the global food supply chain. This situation could have ripple effects that reach our dinner tables. The turn of the Cold War economy. In the world of economic interactions between Russia and the West, oil and gas used to take center stage. But those days are unlikely to return to how they were before the invasion of Ukraine. Russia, however, still holds some important cards in its hand. It's the world's biggest wheat exporter and has a strong presence in forestry products. Plus, it's a source of valuable resources like nickel, cobalt, and platinum. But here's the thing. No matter how this war ends, Western companies are going to be very cautious about going back to Russia or putting their money into it. The risks are just too big. What's happening now feels a bit like a throwback to the Cold War, especially in certain industries. But there's a big difference. Russia doesn't have the same advantages it once did when it was part of the Soviet bloc. Those former Soviet bloc members are now part of the EU and NATO, making Russia's position more challenging. And honestly, there's not much on the horizon that could change the situation. Even if the Ukraine war gets resolved, it's not going to ease Western worries that Putin might try something similar again. like taking more of Ukraine or even all of Moldova. Even if the war ends, Western companies aren't going to rush back into Russia. And while Russians can do without Gucci or McDonald's, the lack of Western technology can hurt high-tech manufacturing. It might also slow down Russia's oil and gas activities, which is a big deal for their economy. Plus, not having access to Western financial markets and systems like SWIFT is another blow. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please subscribe to Beyond Life. I know doing these things is a chore, but with those little clicks, you can help our channel grow and allow us to produce more value-oriented content just like this. That's it for now. Stay safe.